In the summer of 1867, the air in central Missouri hung heavy with dust and heat. The American Civil War had ended only 2 years earlier, but in the farmlands outside Sedalia, the ground still seemed to remember the blood that had soaked into it. Burned barns, broken fences, and the quiet grief of families who had lost sons on distant battlefields left a silence that was never entirely peaceful. People were rebuilding, marrying, planting corn, pretending life had returned to normal, but beneath the surface something restless lingered. Among the scattered farms stood the Caldwell homestead, a weathered property surrounded by tall grass and a line of old willow trees. Before the war, it had been one of the most prosperous farms in the valley. James Caldwell had come from Tennessee with a dream of raising cattle and corn, and for a time he had succeeded. But war had a way of erasing dreams. James was killed at Wilson's Creek in 1861, leaving his wife Martha with 2 sons and debts she could not pay. By the winter of 1865, she was coughing blood and whispering prayers into her handkerchief. When she died that December, the farm passed to her eldest son, Thomas, a young man hardened by loss and loneliness. In the spring of 1866, a letter arrived from Georgia. Thomas's younger brother, William, had died in Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and an 8-year-old boy named Timothy. Thomas and his wife Sarah had no children of their own, and more work than they could manage. The boy needed a home. They needed help. It seemed at first a simple act of charity. When Timothy arrived that April, he carried nothing but a small cloth bag, a worn Bible, and a look in his eyes that made the neighbors uneasy without knowing why. He was small for his age, with skin so pale it almost glowed in the sunlight, and hair the color of dry wheat. Sarah kept it trimmed close to his head to keep away lice. He never complained, never argued, and spoke with a politeness that seemed practiced rather than natural. "Yes, ma'am. No, sir. Always calm, always precise." In a time when children were expected to obey, Timothy obeyed perfectly. Too perfectly. He never played, never laughed, never showed the clumsy joy of childhood. He worked from dawn to dusk without being told twice. When the chores were done, he sat quietly by the window, watching the fields as though they were a puzzle he meant to solve. Neighbors began to notice small things. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose property bordered the Caldwell land, said the boy worked like a machine. He didn't stop to drink water or chase a chicken like other children. "He just keeps on," she told her husband. "'Tain't right for a boy to have no play in him." Animals seemed to share her unease. The Patterson chickens squawked and scattered whenever Timothy came near the fence. Horses rolled their eyes and pulled at their reins. Even the dogs went silent around him. People laughed it off as nonsense. Years later, they would remember those moments differently. Dr. Samuel Harding, the only trained physician for miles, first met Timothy that June. Harding had treated soldiers on both sides of the war and thought he had seen every kind of human nature, but the Caldwell boy unsettled him. When Thomas brought Timothy into town for medicine, the doctor felt an odd chill the moment the child looked at him. The boy answered every question with quiet courtesy, yet Harding wrote later that he felt as if he were the one being examined. His gaze was not the gaze of a child, the doctor noted in his leather-bound journal. It was the gaze of an observer. He forgot the feeling soon enough. There was nothing yet to give it weight. 2 months later, on a sweltering August afternoon, tragedy struck. Mary Fletcher, the 5-year-old daughter of the town blacksmith, was found dead in the shallow water of Willow Creek. It was Timothy who came to the Fletchers' door at dusk, his clothes damp, his voice calm. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." The search party discovered her exactly where he described, face down in barely 18 inches of water. It looked like an accident. Children drowned often in summer creeks, but certain details troubled Dr. Harding. Timothy described the position of her body, the snag of her dress on a submerged branch, even the tint of the water near her face, all with precise clarity. For a frightened child, his recollection was too exact. When asked what he had been doing there, he said he was searching for a lost calf. 2 days later, the missing animal was found alive almost a mile away. At the funeral, the little church was filled with grief and summer heat. Mary's mother collapsed over the coffin. Grown men wept openly. Timothy sat between his aunt and uncle, head bowed, expression serene. He did not cry. Mrs. Patterson, watching from across the aisle, later swore that when the mother screamed, the boy's eyes flicked open. He was not praying, she said. He was watching. Always watching. 3 weeks later, another death. Henrik Larsen, an elderly Norwegian beekeeper, was found broken at the base of Devil's Bluff, a rocky ridge overlooking the same creek. Again, it was Timothy who discovered the body. "I saw Mr. Larsen's hat caught on a thorn bush," he told neighbors. "I called, but he didn't answer, so I climbed down." Dr. Harding examined the scene. The old man's neck was snapped, his skull crushed by the fall. But the doctor noticed something else. Dozens of dead bees scattered in a neat circle around the body. The hives above were intact and calm. "It was as though the bees had gathered here deliberately," Harding wrote. When he asked Timothy what he thought had happened, the boy suggested that perhaps the old man had been stung and lost his footing. His tone was perfectly reasonable. Harding could find no fault, yet the unease in him deepened. In September, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing near the woods. The whole county joined the search. Lanterns swung through the trees for 3 long nights. Timothy walked beside the men, small and tireless, offering to check places others had missed. On the 4th morning, he appeared at the Mills cabin, mud up to his knees, eyes bright with fatigue. "I think I found something," he said. "There's an old well north of here. I heard crying. Beneath a pile of fallen branches they found the well, and Jacob at the bottom barely alive. He died hours later of exposure and thirst." Harding examined the site afterward and realized the debris over the opening had been arranged with deliberate care. Logs that should have fallen randomly were stacked in a pattern meant to hide the well. "Someone placed him there," the doctor wrote, "and ensured he would not be found until rescue was too late." By autumn, whispers spread through Sedalia's fields. Chickens dead with their necks neatly broken, calves strangled in their stalls, horses suddenly lame, always near the Caldwell property. Dr. Harding began visiting more often, keeping notes under the guise of tending Thomas's back. Each time Timothy was present, standing quietly, listening to every word. One afternoon the boy asked, "How do you know if someone's really dead?" "Sometimes people just look like they're sleeping." The doctor's reply caught in his throat. There was no fear in the child's voice, only curiosity. The kind of curiosity that once drove Harding's own students to dissect cadavers. As the first frost silvered the fields, 3 people were dead, and the livestock losses continued. Yet Timothy remained untouchable, a model child, polite, industrious, the orphan everyone pitied. In his journal that December, Dr. Harding wrote the line that would later define the entire case. "This boy displays a total absence of empathy, combined with an intellect far beyond his years. He understands suffering not as tragedy, but as information." The winter of 1866 settled over Sedalia, with the quiet of a held breath. Beneath that stillness, something dark was growing in the Caldwell house, waiting for spring. By the turn of the year, the town of Sedalia had learned to speak about tragedy in whispers. 3 deaths in 3 months had left the community uneasy, though no one dared connect them aloud. In the evenings, men gathered in the blacksmith shop or at the general store, lowering their voices as they spoke of bad luck and restless spirits. But Dr. Samuel Harding no longer believed in coincidence. The more he observed the Caldwell boy, the more certain he became that the accidents were not accidents at all. The boy's politeness, his stillness, his unsettling intelligence, none of it belonged to a normal child. Harding had seen men in wartime who could take a life without blinking. There was something of that same cold detachment in Timothy Caldwell, distilled into a form too young to comprehend the weight of death, yet too aware to be innocent of it. Through January and February, Harding made excuses to visit the Caldwell farm. Thomas Caldwell's back injury provided reason enough. The doctor would arrive in his horse-drawn buggy, carrying his worn black bag, and find Timothy waiting at the door, his expression calm, his hands folded. The boy always stayed close during the examinations, asking polite questions about bones and muscles, about fevers and wounds. Once, while Harding applied liniment to Thomas's spine, Timothy said, "Uncle says pain is God's way of testing people. How do you know when it's too much?" Harding answered carefully, "When pain stops teaching and starts destroying, that's when it's too much." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "I think I'd like to know the difference." After each visit, Harding recorded his observations in a leather-bound notebook. He wrote about the boy's precision of speech, his absence of spontaneous emotion, his fascination with injury and decay. The pattern was undeniable, but the doctor needed evidence. Without it, his suspicions would sound like madness. To accuse an 8-year-old orphan of deliberate murder in 1867, Missouri was to risk his own reputation and sanity. In March, a series of livestock deaths drew renewed attention to the Caldwell's property. Chickens with broken necks, pigs with puncture wounds that looked surgical rather than animal. Neighboring farmers blamed foxes, stray dogs, even wandering thieves. But when Harding examined one of the dead birds himself, he saw something unmistakable. The break was clean at the precise joint where the vertebrae met. A farmer might have done it to kill the bird quickly. A predator would have torn the flesh. But this was deliberate, controlled, anatomical. It required knowledge of where to apply pressure and how much. He found the same precision in other carcasses. Not chance, he wrote. Not hunger. Method. Mrs. Patterson came to him privately not long after. Her voice trembled as she described finding small footprints near her henhouse one morning. Prints too small for a man, but too deliberate for play. "I think it was that Caldwell boy," she whispered. "He's polite as can be, but there's something in him that ain't childlike. My hens don't lay for days after he walks by." Harding advised her to stay quiet. The town was not ready to hear such things. But inside, his fear hardened into certainty. One late evening in April, he decided to visit the farm unannounced. A cold rain had started to fall, soaking the fields. When he knocked, no one answered. Through a crack in the barn door, he saw the faint glow of a lantern. Inside, the air smelled of wet straw and something metallic. Timothy was kneeling near a wooden crate, whispering to himself. When Harding stepped closer, he saw what lay inside. A small rabbit, motionless but still breathing, its eyes wide with panic. The boy was holding a rusted knife, the kind used to cut twine. He turned his head slowly toward the doctor and said, "I was just seeing how long it would take." Harding's voice stayed calm only through force of will. "How long what would take?" The boy tilted his head, considering the question. To stop. He placed the knife down neatly beside him. "It's almost over." The doctor reached forward, scooped the trembling animal into his coat and walked out without another word. Behind him, Timothy's voice followed quietly. "It's all right, doctor. It doesn't feel anything now." That night, by lamplight, Harding began a second journal devoted entirely to Timothy Caldwell. He wrote down every detail, every conversation, every expression. The physician in him wanted to understand. The man in him wanted to run. He wrote that the boy's calmness was not the absence of emotion, but the presence of something opposite, an active stillness, a cold intelligence that studied suffering like a mathematician studies numbers. He called it an inversion of empathy. As spring warmed the valley, strange things continued to happen. A horse belonging to the Dunham family broke its leg in a shallow ditch. A calf belonging to the Wickhams was found hanging from a fence rail, strangled by its own rope. Each time Timothy was seen nearby. Each time his presence could be explained. He was helping. He was curious. He was simply passing through. When questioned, he always answered politely and directly. "I was just watching," he would say, or "I wanted to see if I could help." No one could prove otherwise. In May, Harding visited the farm again, pretending to check on Thomas's recovery. He asked Timothy to fetch water from the pump. When the boy was gone, he spoke quietly to Sarah. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed with worry. "He doesn't sleep," she whispered. "Sometimes I wake up and find him standing by the window, just staring out at the fields. Last week I found one of our hens dead in the kitchen. Its neck was broken. He said a fox brought it in." Her voice broke. "There weren't no fox." Harding told her to stay watchful and promised to return soon. As he left, he glanced toward the barn. Timothy stood in the doorway, the rain behind him like a grey curtain, watching the doctor's carriage roll away. In June, Thomas Caldwell fell from a ladder while repairing the roof and injured his back again. The accident confined him to bed and brought Harding to the house daily. These visits gave the doctor more time to observe Timothy at close range. The boy hovered constantly, bringing towels, fetching water, watching every motion of the doctor's hands. "He studies me," Harding noted. "He studies everyone." One afternoon, while Harding prepared a dose of laudanum for Thomas's pain, Timothy asked, "How much of that would make a man sleep forever?" The question was asked with the same calm interest as one might ask about the weather. Harding answered without looking up. Too much for a child to ever need to know. Timothy smiled faintly. But it would be quick, wouldn't it? The doctor said nothing. Later that evening he locked his medicine case before leaving. By midsummer, Harding had gathered enough to confirm his worst suspicions, but not enough to act. He began to search for a way to catch the boy in evidence. One night, following a clue from a comment Timothy had made about a place where I can think, Harding rode out to the woods south of the farm. There, half hidden by overgrowth, he found a narrow cave. Inside, by the light of his lantern, he discovered the proof he had been dreading. Bones, dozens of them. Birds, rabbits, squirrels, small wooden boxes labeled with neat handwriting. Eye removed, no movement. 10 minutes. Beside them lay crude tools fashioned from farm implements and a stack of papers covered in drawings, detailed sketches of anatomy, both animal and human. Each drawing was accompanied by notes in the same tidy hand. Subject remained conscious for 9 minutes. Applied. Pressure to throat until still. Response. Weakens after repeated trauma. Harding turned the pages with shaking hands until he found something that froze him completely. The drawings changed. No longer animals, but people. A young girl in a long dress, her face eerily familiar, Mary Fletcher. An old man with a beard, Henrik Larsson. A small child trapped at the bottom of a well, Jacob Mills. Under each sketch were notes describing the process of death, the duration of struggle. The physical responses observed. The doctor stumbled out into the night air, gasping. His mind spun between duty and disbelief. He could not bring this to the sheriff without admitting he had entered private property. And who would believe him? An 8-year-old boy as a calculating killer, it defied every notion of human nature. He rode back to town before dawn, his lantern swinging wildly in the dark. That morning he resolved to confront the boy directly. He could no longer watch and do nothing. On his next visit to the farm, he asked Timothy to walk with him to the pasture. The sun was high, the grass heavy with dew. Harding told him what he had found in the cave. The boy listened silently, his pale eyes bright in the light. When the doctor finished, Timothy said, "You're not going to tell anyone." His tone was calm, almost kind. Harding forced a laugh. "Why wouldn't I?" The boy's mouth curved into a smile, the first real expression Harding had ever seen on his face. "Because no one would believe you," he said. "And because you want to see what happens next." For a moment the doctor could not speak. Timothy turned away, running a hand along the tall grass. "I've been doing this since I was 5, he said quietly. "I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things. People are just another kind of animal, only smarter. They understand what's happening. That makes it more interesting." Harding felt the world tilt beneath him. "And what are you planning now?" he asked. The boy looked up, the sun glinting in his eyes. "I need to find out what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely." The words hung between them, terrible in their simplicity. Harding knew at once who he meant, Thomas and Sarah. That evening the doctor rode straight to town and sought out Sheriff William Crawford. Crawford was a blunt man, a former soldier, not easily rattled. But as he examined the drawings and listened to Harding's account, even his weathered face paled. "If half of this is true," he said, "we're dealing with something this county's never seen." Together they devised a plan. The next morning, Harding would return to the Caldwell farm under the pretense of medical care. Crawford and 2 deputies would position themselves nearby, ready to act at the first sign of violence. As Harding prepared for what might come, he wrote one last note in his journal that night. "This boy possesses intelligence without compassion, knowledge without conscience. He is studying us all, and he will not stop until someone stops him." The ink blotched on the page where his hand trembled. Outside, thunder rolled across the fields. The storm had begun. The morning after the storm, a low fog hung over the valley, soft and white like the breath of the earth itself. The Caldwell farm stood quiet, its fences slick with dew, its fields washed clean by rain. Dr. Samuel Harding arrived just after sunrise. He could feel the weight of silence, even before he stepped from his buggy. No chickens clucked, no dogs barked, no human voice called out. It was as if the entire property was holding its breath. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement at the farmhouse door. Timothy stood there waiting, motionless, his pale eyes unblinking. The boy's sleeves were rolled to his elbows. His hands were wet, scrubbed so clean they were red. "Good morning, Doctor," Timothy said in that calm, polite voice. "I've been waiting for you." Harding's heart tightened. The phrasing, the tone, everything about it carried an undertone of calculation. He stepped inside and smelled something faintly bitter in the air, a smell he recognized instantly. Nightshade mixed with herbs. On the bed, Thomas Caldwell lay still, his breathing shallow, his skin grey. Beside him, Sarah lay unconscious, her hands limp at her sides. Harding checked their pulses. "Weak but steady, what did you give them?" he asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the boy. Timothy's answer came easily. "Just some herbs I found in the woods. Some of them have interesting effects." He smiled slightly. "They won't wake up for hours." "That means we can talk without interruption." Harding turned toward him. "What do you want to talk about?" Timothy's smile widened. "About my work. You found my cave, so you already know most of it. I thought maybe you'd understand." The doctor kept his voice level. "You killed them, Timothy. Mary Fletcher, Henrik Larson, Jacob Mills. You hurt animals. You lied. You poisoned your family." The boy tilted his head. "I didn't lie," he said. "I studied." "That's what you do too, isn't it? You watch how things die, so you can learn how to stop it." "I watch for the same reason." Harding felt his stomach twist. "There's a difference between learning to heal and learning to harm." Timothy took a slow step forward. "Maybe, but you still watch. You still want to know what happens. That's why you're here." His voice softened almost to a whisper. "You're not going to stop me, Doctor. You want to see what I'll do next." The boy's confidence was unbearable, and yet part of Harding knew it was true. Somewhere beneath his horror was the pull of morbid curiosity, the same curiosity that had driven him to the cave instead of straight to the sheriff. Timothy saw that truth and fed on it. "How long have you been doing this?" Harding asked. "Since I was 5, the boy said. "I started with insects, then birds, rabbits. I wanted to understand what life is, how it leaves. Animals stop fighting after a while. People don't. They know it's coming. That makes it different." "What are you planning to do next?" Harding asked. Timothy looked down at his uncle's limp hand. "I need to see what happens when someone who trusts you completely realizes too late what's happening. That's the moment I've never seen." Harding took one step back, his mind racing. Outside, he knew the sheriff and 2 deputies were hidden, waiting. He had to buy time. He tried to keep his voice steady. "How you think of yourself as a scientist?" The boy's face lit up, proud, almost eager. "Exactly. I record everything. I test variables. I learn." His eyes flicked toward the table, where a heavy candlestick, a coil of rope, and 2 kitchen knives lay neatly arranged. "I see I've prepared today's experiment carefully." "Timothy," Harding said quietly, "listen to me. You're very ill. This, what you're feeling, is not knowledge. It's sickness." The boy laughed softly. "No, Doctor. It's clarity. Everyone else walks through life blind. I see what they really are. Animals that pretend to feel. You too." He took another step closer. "Tell me, Doctor, when you cut off a soldier's leg in the war, how did he scream? Did he look at you like I look at you now?" Harding's hand moved to his medical bag. Inside, beneath the bandages, was his revolver, a Colt Navy model he carried since the war. He drew it slowly, leveling it at the boy. "Step away from the table," he said. Timothy looked at the weapon with curiosity, not fear. "6 shots," he said softly. "And there are 6 of us here, yourself, my uncle, my aunt, and the 3 men outside. If you shoot me, you'll have none left." His smile did not waver. "You want to know why I'm like this, don't you? You want to see if I was born without something or if the world took it from me." Harding's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't come closer." Timothy spread his hands. "You can't kill me. I'm the most important thing you'll ever find. I'm the proof that good and evil aren't opposites. They're just curiosities." He moved fast, faster than Harding expected, grabbing the rope from the table and lunging forward. The gun fired once, deafening in the small room, the bullet tearing through the boy's sleeve. He stumbled but didn't cry out. He swung the rope like a whip, knocking the pistol from Harding's hand, and lunged again with a knife he had hidden in his clothes. The blade sliced across Harding's forearm, drawing blood. The doctor caught Timothy's wrist, twisting hard, forcing the knife to drop. But the boy kicked at his knee and broke free, reaching for the candlestick. The sound of shouting and boots came from outside. The back door burst open. Sheriff Crawford and his 2 deputies rushed in, guns drawn, In the chaos, Harding threw himself between Timothy and the bed where Thomas and Sarah lay motionless. The boy slashed wildly, then froze as Deputy Mitchell tackled him to the floor. The fight ended in seconds. When it was over, Timothy sat on the floor, bound at the wrists, his hair hanging over his eyes, his breath slow and even. "You can't prove anything," he said calmly. "Nobody will believe a child did all this." Crawford glared down at him. "We don't have to prove all of it," he said. "We saw enough." Timothy looked up and smiled, blood at the corner of his mouth. "You won't hang me," he said. "I'm too young. I'm too interesting." They carried him out into the morning light, his small figure dwarfed by the men around him. He didn't resist. He only watched as they loaded him into the sheriff's wagon, his pale eyes reflecting the grey sky. Inside the house, Harding checked on Thomas and Sarah. They were alive, weak but breathing. Whatever poison the boy had used was wearing off. He bandaged his own arm and sat down, shaking, staring at the blood on his sleeve. He wrote a single sentence in his notebook. "I have looked into the eyes of something that wears the shape of a child, but carries no soul." In the following days, the town erupted in disbelief. People came to the sheriff's office to see the boy who had nearly killed his own family. Some pitied him, convinced he was possessed or mad. Others demanded he be hanged like any murderer. The law, however, had no precedent. 8 years old was too young for adult prosecution, yet too dangerous for release. The case spread quickly through Missouri's newspapers, though the full details, the drawings, the cave, the confession, were kept from the public. Dr. Harding testified that Timothy had spoken calmly about the killings, that he had described his methods with precision and without remorse. The court clerk wrote in the record, "The boy appears of sound mind but unsound heart." In the end, the authorities agreed on a compromise. Timothy Caldwell would not be executed. Instead, he would be remanded to the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton to be studied and confined. For the first time in American history, a child was officially diagnosed with what doctors called moral insanity. The sheriff and his men escorted him under heavy guard. Witnesses later said that as the wagon rolled out of Sedalia, the boy turned and looked back toward the crowd gathered along the road. He smiled and waved as if leaving for a pleasant trip. Dr. Harding volunteered to accompany him to the hospital. During the 2-day journey, Timothy spoke little, but when he did, it was never nonsense. "Do you think they'll try to cure me?" he asked once. Harding replied quietly, "I hope so." The boy's lips curved faintly. "If they succeed, I won't be me anymore." At Fulton, Harding met with the hospital's director, Dr. Charles Wentworth, and presented his journals. The other physicians listened with skepticism. To them, Timothy was a traumatized orphan, nothing more. Harding warned them not to underestimate him. "He learns by watching," he said. "He will know you better than you know yourselves." Wentworth nodded politely and ordered that Timothy be placed under constant supervision. Harding stayed on for several weeks, helping the staff document their new patient. He noted in his third journal that Timothy adapted quickly. Within days, he had memorized the nurses' routines, the schedule of meals, the keys that opened each ward. He spoke softly to other children, gaining their trust, asking them what frightened them most. To the doctors, he was obedient and curious. To the attendants, he was harmless. But Harding saw through it. The boy was learning again, collecting data. "He mimics emotion," Harding wrote. "Smiles, tears, remorse, all perfect imitations. But the eyes remain unchanged. They are the eyes of a predator." In a letter to Sheriff Crawford that autumn, Harding summarized his fear. "He is not mad in the way we understand madness. He is reason without mercy, intellect without empathy. If he lives to grow, I fear what he might become." Outside the hospital walls, Sedalia tried to return to normal. The Caldwell farm fell silent again, its fields overgrown, its fences leaning. The cave was sealed with stones under the sheriff's order. Yet among those who had seen what the boy could do, peace never fully returned. In the evenings, when the wind passed through the valley, some swore they could hear a child's laughter, echoing faintly from the hills. After the summer of 1868, the Missouri State Hospital closed its records on patient number 17, listing him officially as deceased. But the truth was something no report could bury. In the months that followed, strange deaths began to appear across the Midwest. small, isolated incidents that seemed unrelated to one another until Dr. Samuel Harding started connecting the dots. A drowned child in Kansas, a farmhand crushed under a collapsed fence in Iowa, a woman found lifeless beside a well in Illinois. The accidents spanned hundreds of miles, but the details were always the same. No witnesses, no clear motive, and traces of deliberate arrangement. Tools placed neatly nearby, footprints of a child too small to belong to any grown man. Each case carried the same quiet signature, a pattern of control and curiosity. Harding knew. He had seen it before. In his journals, he wrote that the boy could no longer be thought of as a patient or even a fugitive. He called him a study in motion, a living experiment without boundaries. Timothy, now perhaps 10 or 11, would have grown stronger, smarter, harder to recognize. A child's face could change quickly, and with every month that passed, he became less like a boy and more like an idea. Harding believed he was still learning, still perfecting his understanding of life and death, only now in a world that had forgotten his name. By 1872, Harding's notes filled an entire trunk. He recorded sightings, coincidences, rumors. A preacher in St. Joseph reported a pale youth who joined his congregation briefly, quoting scripture with eerie precision, then vanished after a parishioner was found suffocated in her sleep. A traveling photographer in Nebraska told of a boy who offered to help set up equipment and later stole a set of chemicals, acids strong enough to dissolve bone. A school teacher in Minnesota described a student who seemed to know too much about anatomy, too much about pain. Each account faded into hearsay, yet together they formed a map of unease stretching across the center of the country. Harding devoted the rest of his life to tracing that map. His colleagues called it madness. He called it responsibility. He began corresponding with early criminologists in Europe, describing a new kind of killer, not driven by passion or greed, but by the study of reaction. He wrote that Timothy represented the complete separation of intelligence from empathy, a condition that no treatment could reach because it was not a sickness, but a design. If he survived, Harding warned, he will become something the world has no name for yet, a man who kills not for pleasure, not for anger, but for knowledge. In the late 1880s, letters reached him from as far away as Chicago and St. Louis. Police investigating mysterious deaths found his writings and sought his insight. In one letter, a detective described a series of disappearances near the riverfront. The victims were all small animals at first, then stray children. On a wall near one of the crime scenes, written faintly in chalk, someone had drawn an eye inside a circle, a symbol identical to one Harding had seen on Timothy's notes years earlier. When he read that report, the old doctor did not sleep for 3 nights. He knew the pattern had returned. By then, Harding's health was failing. The war had left his lungs weak, and age had turned his hands unsteady. Still, he continued to write by candlelight, filling page after page with reflections and fears. His final journal, dated 1891, read like a confession. "I once believed evil was the absence of good," he wrote. "Now I see it is something entirely its own, a presence, not a void. I have watched it take shape in the body of a child, and I know now it was not born of trauma or misfortune. It was born complete." In his last recorded entry, written days before his death, Harding left a warning. "If Timothy Caldwell lives, he is no longer a boy. He walks among us, unseen, educated, disciplined. He understands human nature better than any philosopher or priest. He knows how to speak, how to smile, how to make you trust him. And when he studies you, you will think he is listening with kindness. He is not, he is measuring." After Harding's death, his daughter found the journals stacked neatly on his desk, tied with ribbon, and labeled simply "The Caldwell Case." She donated them to the Missouri Historical Society decades later, believing they held medical significance. Most of the entries were sealed, accessible only to accredited researchers. A few excerpts were published in psychiatric journals, sparking brief debate about the origins of psychopathy and the boundaries of morality. Then the story faded, becoming little more than a local legend, another ghost tale from the old frontier. The Caldwell farm, meanwhile, was abandoned. Thomas and Sarah, once recovered from their poisoning, sold the land and moved east under different names. They never had children, never spoke publicly about what had happened. Neighbors said Sarah often looked over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at the door. When she died in 1889, her last words, according to the nurse who tended her, were, "Tell him we forgave him." Thomas followed 5 years later, leaving no note, no marker. The farm fell into disrepair, its fields reclaimed by grass. Local children dared each other to approach the ruins, whispering that animals refused to graze there, and that at night faint scratching could be heard from beneath the earth, where the cave had once been sealed. In 1903, a team of county workers clearing the area discovered a small opening in the ground near the edge of the old property. Inside, they found remnants of wooden crates and rusted tools. Among the debris was a single scrap of paper, half rotted by moisture but still legible. It contained only a few words written in a child's careful hand. "The experiment never ends." The find was dismissed as coincidence, a prank left by vandals. The evidence was lost, the paper disintegrated before it could be archived. Yet for those who knew the history, the phrase lingered like a curse. In the decades that followed, the legend of the Caldwell boy became part of Missouri folklore. Travelers spoke of a figure seen at dusk, near lonely crossroads, a man with pale eyes who walked with the calm of someone who had all the time in the world. In rural towns from Kansas to Illinois, people told stories of strangers who passed through, men who offered help during accidents, who found the lost, who stayed just long enough for tragedy to follow. Every generation gave the story a new name: the silent doctor, the man without a shadow, the boy from Sedalia. But those who read Harding's journals knew the truth. He was none of those things. He was simply Timothy, still observing. Historians who examined the Caldwell documents in the 20th century described them as some of the earliest studies of antisocial behavior in children. Psychologists debated whether the boy had been a product of genetic defect, brain injury, or divine punishment. None could explain the level of intelligence and manipulation described. Some doubted the case entirely, claiming Harding had exaggerated or lost his sanity before death. But even skeptics admitted that too many details matched real events: the deaths, the cave, the sealed records from the hospital. The Missouri Historical Society kept the journals locked for decades, opening them only to a few researchers under strict supervision. One of those researchers, in 1956, left a brief note after reading them. It said, "The handwriting in Harding's final entries changes. The last pages are written in a child's hand." The note was later removed from the archive, and no one could confirm its authenticity. Today, the Caldwell farm no longer exists. A stretch of modern road runs through what was once the valley. Drivers who pass that way at night sometimes report seeing a figure at the edge of the tree line, a man standing perfectly still, watching the headlights fade. No one ever sees him move. No one ever sees where he goes. But those who have heard the story say the same thing. His eyes are too pale, his smile too calm. More than a century has passed since the boy from Sedalia vanished from his cell in Fulton. Yet the questions he left behind still trouble anyone who studies the human mind. Was he the product of circumstance, or was he something else entirely? A glimpse of what humanity could become if stripped of empathy. In his final message to the world, Dr. Harding wrote that Timothy was not a monster born in darkness, but a mirror held up to mankind. "He is what remains when conscience is removed," the doctor wrote. "And perhaps the reason we fear him is because we recognize ourselves." Somewhere in Missouri, buried under the layers of time and soil, the cave where the first experiments took place is said to remain sealed. Locals avoid it, not out of superstition but out of instinct. They say the earth there never warms, even in summer. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the valley just right, a whisper seems to rise from beneath the ground, soft and steady, like a boy's voice reciting his notes. The truth about Timothy Caldwell was never officially closed. The files remain incomplete, the ending unwritten. Maybe he died by the river, carried away by the current, just another lost child of the post-war years. Or maybe, as Harding feared, he survived, grew up, changed his name, and continued his study of human nature in a world too crowded to notice one quiet man among millions. Whatever the truth, one line from Harding's last journal remains a warning more than a century later. Evil does not vanish. It adapts. And so perhaps somewhere in the vast heart of America, a man with pale blue eyes still walks the back roads, listening, learning, watching.